On one side, Brazil, the most successful nation in the history of the World Cup. 5-time champions, the kings, the aristocracy, the yellow shirt that has terrified opponents for 70 years. On the other side, Norway, a country playing in its first World Cup in 28 years, a team most of the planet expected to be a fun little story that ended right about here, in the round of 16, politely swept aside by the Giants. It was supposed to be a formality. And then, in the space of 11 brutal minutes, one enormous Norwegian tore that entire idea to shreds, dumped the 5-time champions out of the tournament, and dragged his tiny nation into the last 8 for the first time in its history. His name, of course, is Erling Haaland. And this is the night the machine slayed Brazil. Let's set the scene because on paper, this was a mismatch. Brazil, for all their recent struggles, are still Brazil. Neymar, a world-class spine, that endless production line of talent, and 5 stars on the shirt that no other nation can match. Norway were the romantics' pick, the dark horse, but nobody seriously believed they would knock out the Seleção. And this was, remember, the same Haaland story we've been marveling at all tournament, the greatest goal machine on earth, who spent his whole life locked out of the World Cup because his country could never qualify, finally here at 25 and making up for lost time. But making up for lost time against Iraq and Senegal is one thing. Doing it against Brazil in a World Cup knockout is another entirely. And for a long while, it looked like Brazil would remind everyone why they wear those 5 stars. They came flying out, pressing, probing, and they won an early penalty, a golden chance to take control of the game and settle the nerves. Bruno Guimaraes stepped up and saw his spot kick saved. That was the first crack, the first tiny sign that maybe, just maybe, the script was not going to go the way everyone assumed. Because a saved penalty does not just deny a goal, it pours belief into the other team. And there is no worse team on earth to hand belief to than one with Erling Haaland leading the line. The game stayed tight, tense, nervy. Brazil pushing, Norway defending for their lives, waiting. And then came the 11 minutes that will be replayed in Norway for the next 100 years. The 79th minute. A cross swung into the Brazilian box, and there, rising above everyone, was Haaland. A towering header that flew past Alisson, one of the very best goalkeepers on the planet, and into the net. 1-0, Norway. The underdogs, in front. And if that woke Brazil up, it was already too late, because the machine was not finished. A few minutes later, Haaland got the ball, wound up from distance, and absolutely leathered a low drive that skidded away into the far corner. 2-0. His 6th and 7th goals of the tournament, both arriving in the last 11 minutes of the biggest game of his life to knock out the 5-time world champions. You could not have scripted it, and no defender on earth could have stopped it. Brazil, to their credit, threw everything forward in a desperate scramble, and deep into stoppage time they were thrown a lifeline. A penalty, converted by Neymar to make it 2-1. For a heartbeat, the yellow shirts dared to dream of one of their famous escapes. But it was pure consolation. The whistle went, and it was done. Brazil were out of the World Cup in the round of 16, beaten by Norway. Now let's talk about how enormous this actually is. This is not a giant stumbling. This is a giant being knocked out cold. Brazil are the 5-time world champions, the aristocracy of the entire sport, and they have just crashed out at the last 16 stage, their earliest exit from a World Cup since 1990. And there is a genuinely damning statistic buried in this defeat. It is now 6 consecutive World Cups in which Brazil have been eliminated by a European team. 6 in a row. The nation that once floated above everyone, that played the beautiful game like no one else, has now become a team that keeps running into Europe and keeps coming home early. The Brazilian decline is no longer a talking point. It is a hard, cold, repeated fact. And it fits a longer, sadder story. This is a country that has not won the World Cup since 2002. Over 2 decades of hurt for a nation that treats the trophy as its birthright. They were humiliated 7-1 on home soil in 2014, a scar Brazilian football has never fully healed from. They went out in the quarterfinals in 2018 and again in 2022, and now they have not even reached the quarters. Every 4 years, the yellow shirt shows up as one of the favorites, and every 4 years, it leaves a little earlier, looking a little more ordinary. The aura that once left opponents beaten before kickoff is gone, and a fearless Norway just proved it, in the most brutal way imaginable. And on the other side of it, pure delirious history. Norway have reached the quarterfinals of a World Cup for the first time ever. Not for the first time in decades, for the first time in their entire existence, and they've done it in their first tournament back after 28 years away. Their coach, Ståle Solbakken, summed it up perfectly afterwards, almost in disbelief. He said all of Norway was living the night of a lifetime, that they had probably changed Norwegian football forever, and that the country would be partying for about a week. And he is not exaggerating. A nation of barely 5 million people has just knocked the 5-time world champions out of the World Cup. Things like that do not happen. Except, tonight, one did. And you cannot tell the story of this Norwegian team without telling the story of how they celebrate. Because their fans have quietly become one of the best things about the entire tournament. It is called the Viking Row. Picture thousands of Norwegian supporters, all sitting down in perfect unison and then heaving back and forth together as if they are rowing a giant Viking longship, roaring, "Row!" Norwegian for row, like a crew dragging their ship into battle. It started as one superfan's idea, and it has completely taken over. They have done it on the New York subway. They have done it in the middle of Times Square, stopping the busiest crossroads on Earth to row an invisible Viking ship. They have done it in elevators, on escalators, outside their own parliament. Even the players are in on it. Haaland himself pushed for the team to adopt it, and he and Captain Martin Odegaard lead it on the pitch after every win. When they came through the group stage, thousands of fans marched on the royal palace in the dead of night, chanting that they were going to wake up the king, and then rowed their Viking ship at his gates. And now, having knocked out Brazil, an entire nation of Vikings gets to row all the way into the quarterfinals. And at the very center of all of it, again, is Haaland. Think about the arc of this. This is the man who waited a quarter of a century for a World Cup, who was written off as a phenomenon without a stage, who admitted he never truly believed nights like this were even possible. After the game, he said it himself, that he had dreamt of playing at a World Cup with Norway, but never once expected to actually beat Brazil, that he thought some things simply were not possible, and that, clearly, he was wrong. He became the first Norwegian ever to score twice in a knockout match at a major international tournament, and he did it against the most decorated team the sport has ever produced. The machine is not just making up for lost time anymore. He is rewriting his country's entire history, one demolition at a time. So where does this leave us? Norway march on into the quarterfinals, where they will meet England, who edged past Mexico in their own last 16 tie. The dark horse that every pundit and every supercomputer quietly warned everyone about is now one of the 8 best teams left in the world. And there is not a single side remaining who would want to see Norway and that number 9 on the other side of the pitch. And zoom out, and the pattern of this entire tournament becomes impossible to ignore. Germany, gone. The Netherlands, gone. And now, Brazil. The 5-time champions, the greatest name in the sport, slain in the round of 16 by a nation of 5 million and a striker who spent his whole life waiting for exactly this moment. The giants keep falling. The old certainties keep dying. And somewhere out there tonight, in a sea of fans rowing an invisible longship, Erling Haaland has just ended Brazil's World Cup and is already thinking about who he gets to knock over next. Because if this tournament has taught us anything, it is that nobody, not even the kings, is safe.